Hi everybody, welcome back to our chapter book read-along of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by JK Rowling. We are now on chapter 9. We're moving right along, but that means we have a lot to review before we get started. So, if you can, pause the video and talk with those who you're watching this video with about what we have read so far. Ready? Here goes my review. Harry Potter is the boy who lived. He is a wizard who, when he was a baby, survived being attacked by an evil dark wizard named Voldemort. Sadly, his parents died, and he had to go live with his not very nice aunt, uncle, and cousin, the Dursleys. They are muggles, which means they don't have any magic at all, and are not very nice people. Harry learned on his 11th birthday that he was a wizard, or is a wizard, I guess, and went with Hagrid to Diagon Alley to Gringotts Wizarding Bank and then shopping for all his supplies to then go to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. At Hogwarts, Harry has met some friends. He rode the Hogwarts Express with Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger and Neville Longbottom, as well as Ron's siblings, Percy, Fred, and George. We also have met some not-so-great people. Draco Malfoy is a boy who is also Harry's age, who is not very nice, nor are his friends Crabbe and Goyle. Harry and his friends and everybody got sorted into different houses in Hogwarts. The houses are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Harry and his friends are Gryffindors. So, we have now heard all about Harry's first week at school, how the classes are hard, how they're working hard at doing other things, and he met Professor Snape, who is not very nice to him, and the potions master. We learned at the very end that someone broke into Gringotts Bank the same day that Harry and Hagrid were there, into a vault that had just been emptied. Harry thinks it's suspicious, and Hagrid was avoiding him. But we are about to find out what happens next in Chapter 9, The Midnight Duel. Enjoy! Chapter 9, The Midnight Duel. Harry had never believed he would meet a boy he hated more than Dudley, but that was before he met Draco Malfoy. Still, first-year Gryffindors only had potions with the Slytherins, so they didn't have to put up with Malfoy much. Or at least, they didn't until they spotted a notice pinned up in the Gryffindor common room, which made them all groan. Flying lessons would be starting on Thursday, and Gryffindor and Slytherin would be learning together. "Typical," said Harry darkly. "Just what I always wanted, to make a fool of myself on a broomstick in front of Malfoy." He had been looking forward to learning to fly more than anything else. "You don't know you'll make a fool of yourself," said Ron reasonably. "Anyway, I know Malfoy's always going on about how he's good at Quidditch, but I bet it's all talk." Malfoy certainly did talk about flying a lot. He complained loudly that first years never got on the house Quidditch teams and told long, boastful stories, which always seemed to end with him narrowly escaping muggles in helicopters. He wasn't the only one, though. The way Seamus Finnegan told it, he'd spent most of his childhood zooming around the countryside on his broomstick. Even Ron would tell anyone who would listen about the time he'd almost hit a hang glider on Charlie's old broom. Everyone from wizarding families talked about Quidditch constantly. Ron had already had a big argument with Dean Thomas, who shared their dormitory, about football. Ron couldn't see what was exciting about a game with only one ball and there was no one allowed to fly. Harry had caught Ron prodding Dean's poster of West Ham football team, trying to make the players move. Neville had never been on a broomstick in his life because his grandmother had never let him near one. Privately, Harry felt she'd had good reason, because Neville managed to have an extraordinary number of accidents even with both feet on the ground. Hermione Granger was almost as nervous about flying as Neville was. This was something you couldn't learn by heart out of a book. Not that she hadn't tried. At breakfast on Thursday, she bored them all with flying tips she got out of a library book called Quidditch Through the Ages. Neville was hanging on her every word, desperate for anything that might help him hang on to his broomstick later. But everybody else was very pleased when Hermione's lecture was interrupted by the arrival of the post. Harry hadn't had a single letter since Hagrid's note, something that Malfoy had been quick to notice, of course. Malfoy's eagle owl was always bringing him packages of sweets from home, which he opened gloatingly at the Slytherin table. A barn owl brought Neville a small package from his grandmother. He opened it excitedly and showed them a glass ball the size of a large marble, which seemed to be full of white smoke. "It's a Remembrall," he explained. "Gran knows I always forget things. This tells you if there's something you've forgotten to do. Look, you hold it tight like this, and if it turns red, oh." His face fell, because the Remembrall had suddenly glowed scarlet red. "You've forgotten something." Neville was trying to remember what he'd forgotten when Draco Malfoy, who was passing the Gryffindor table, snatched the Remembrall out of his hand. Harry and Ron jumped to their feet. They were half hoping for a reason to fight Malfoy, but Professor McGonagall, who could spot trouble quicker than any teacher in the school, was there in a flash. "What's going on?" she said. "Malfoy's got my Remembrall, Professor." Scowling, Malfoy quickly dropped the Remembrall back on the table. "Just looking," said Malfoy, and he sloped away with Crabbe and Goyle behind him. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Harry, Ron, and the other Gryffindors hurried down the front steps into the grounds for their first flying lesson. It was a clear, breezy day, and the grass rippled under their feet as they marched down the sloping lawns toward a smooth lawn on the opposite side of the grounds to the Forbidden Forest, whose trees were swaying darkly in the distance. The Slytherins were already there, and so were 20 broomsticks lying in neat lines on the ground. Harry had heard Fred and George Weasley complain about the school brooms, saying that some of them started to vibrate if you flew too high, or always flew slightly to the left. Their teacher, Madame Hooch, arrived. She had short gray hair and yellow eyes like a hawk. "Well," she said, "what are you waiting for? Everyone stand by a broomstick. Come on, hurry up." Harry glanced down at his broom. It was old, and some of the twigs stuck out at odd angles. "Stick your right hand over your broom," called Madame Hooch at the front, "and say, 'Up!'" "Up!" everyone shouted. Harry's broom jumped into his hand at once, but it was one of the few that did. Hermione Granger's had simply rolled over on the ground, and Neville's hadn't moved at all. Perhaps brooms, like horses, could tell when you were afraid, thought Harry. There was a quiver in Neville's voice that said only too clearly that he wanted to keep his feet on the ground. Madame Hooch then showed them how to mount their brooms without sliding off the end, and walked up and down the rows, correcting their grips. Harry and Ron were delighted when she told Malfoy he'd been doing it wrong for years. "Now, when I blow my whistle, you kick off the ground hard," said Madame Hooch. "Keep your broom steady, rise a few feet, and then come straight back down by leaning forward slightly. On my whistle, 3, 2... But Neville, nervous and jumpy and frightened of being left on the ground, pushed off hard before the whistle had touched Madame Hooch's lips. "Come back, boy!" she shouted. But Neville was rising straight up, like a cork shot out of a bottle. 12 feet, 20 feet. Harry saw his scared white face look down at the ground, falling away. Saw him gasp, slip sideways off the broom, and wham! A thud and a nasty crack, and Neville lay face down on the grass in a heap. His broomstick was still raising higher and higher and started to drift lazily toward the forbidden forest and out of sight. Madame Hooch was bending over Neville, her face as white as his. "Broken wrist," Harry heard her mutter. "Come on, boy. It's all right. Up you get." She turned to the rest of the class. "None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are, or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come on, dear." Neville, his face tear-streaked, clutching his wrist, hobbled off with Madame Hooch, who had her arm around him. No sooner were they out of earshot than Malfoy burst into laughter. "Did you see his face, the great lump?" The other Slytherins joined in. "Shut up, Malfoy," snapped Parvati Patil. "Who's sticking up for Longbottom?" said Pansy Parkinson, a hard-faced Slytherin girl. "Never thought you'd like a fat little crybaby, Parvati." "Look," said Malfoy, darting forward and snatching something out of the grass. "It's that stupid thing Longbottom's gran sent him." The Remembrall glittered in the sun as he held it up. "Give that here, Malfoy," said Harry quietly. Everyone stopped talking to watch. Malfoy smiled nastily. "I think I'll leave it somewhere for Longbottom to collect. How about up a tree?" "Give it here," Harry yelled. But Malfoy had leapt on his broom and taken off. He hadn't been lying. He could fly well. Hovering level with the topmost branches of the oak, he called, "Come and get it, Potter!" Harry grabbed his broom. "No!" shouted Hermione Granger. "Madame Hooch told us not to move. You get us all into trouble." Harry ignored her. Blood was pounding in his ears. He mounted the broom and kicked hard against the ground, and up, up he soared. Air rushed through his hair, and his robes whipped out behind him. And in a rush of fierce joy, he realized he'd found something he could do without being taught. This was easy. This was wonderful. He pulled his broomstick up a little to take it even higher, and heard screams and gasps of girls back on the ground, and an admiring whoop from Ron. He turned his broomstick sharply to face Malfoy in midair. Malfoy looked stunned. "Give it here," Harry called, "or I'll knock you off your broom." "Oh, yeah?" said Malfoy, trying to sneer, but looking worried. Harry knew somehow what to do. He leaned forward and grasped the broom tightly in both hands and shot towards Malfoy like a javelin. Malfoy only just got out of the way in time. Harry made a sharp about turn and held the broom steady. A few people below were clapping. "No Crab and Goyle up here to save your neck, Malfoy," Harry called. The same thought seemed to have struck Malfoy. "Catch me if you can, then," he shouted, and he threw the glass ball high into the air and streaked back towards the ground. Harry saw, as though in slow motion, the ball rise up in the air and then start to fall. He leant forward and pointed his broom handle down. The next second, he was gathering speed in a steep dive, racing the ball. Wind whistled in his ears, mingled with the screams of people watching. He stretched out his hand. A foot from the ground, he caught it. Just in time to pull his broom straight, he toppled gently onto the grass, with the Remembrall clutched safely in his fist. "Harry Potter!" His heart sank faster than he had just dived. Professor McGonagall was running towards them. He got to his feet, trembling. "Never in all my time at Hogwarts!" Professor McGonagall was almost speechless with shock, and her glasses flashed furiously. "How dare you! Might have broken your neck!" "It wasn't his fault, Professor." "Be quiet, Miss Patil." "But Malfoy—" "That's enough, Mr. Weasley. Potter, follow me now." Harry caught sight of Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle's triumphant faces as he left, walking numbly in Professor McGonagall's wake as she strode towards the castle. He was going to be expelled. He just knew it. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but there seemed to be something wrong with his voice. Professor McGonagall was sweeping along without even looking at him. He had to jog to keep up. Now he'd done it. He hadn't even lasted 2 weeks. He'd be packing his bags in 10 minutes. What would the Dursleys say when he turned up on their doorstep? Up the front steps, up the marble staircase inside, and still Professor McGonagall didn't say a word to him. She wrenched open the doors and marched along corridors with Harry trotting miserably behind her. Maybe she was taking him to Dumbledore. He thought of Hagrid, expelled but allowed to stay as gamekeeper. Perhaps he could be Hagrid's assistant. His stomach twisted as he imagined it, watching Ron and the others becoming wizards while he stumped around the grounds carrying Hagrid's bag. Professor McGonagall stopped outside a classroom. She opened the door and poked her head inside. "Excuse me, Mr. Flitwick, could I borrow wood for a moment?" Wood? Thought Harry, bewildered. Was wood a cane she was going to use on him? But wood turned out to be a person. A burly fifth-year boy who came out of Flitwick's class looking confused. "Follow me, you two," said Professor McGonagall, and they marched up the corridor, Wood looking curiously at Harry. "In here." Professor McGonagall pointed them into a classroom which was empty except for Peeves, who was busy writing rude words on the blackboard. "Out, Peeves!" she barked. Peeves threw the chalk into a bin, which clanged loudly, and he swooped out cursing. Professor McGonagall slammed the door behind him and turned to face the boys. "Potter, this is Oliver Wood. Wood, I've found you a seeker." Wood's expression changed from puzzlement to delight. "Are you serious, Professor?" "Absolutely," she said crisply. "The boy's a natural. I've never seen anything like it. Was that your first time on a broomstick, Potter?" Harry nodded slightly. He didn't have a clue what was going on, but he didn't seem to be getting expelled, and some of the feeling started to come back to his legs. "He caught that thing in his hand after a 50-foot dive," Professor McGonagall told Wood. "Didn't even scratch himself. Charlie Weasley couldn't have done it." Wood was now looking as though all his dreams had come true at once. "Ever seen a game of Quidditch, Potter?" he asked excitedly. "Wood's captain of the Gryffindor team," Professor McGonagall explained. "He is just built just like a seeker too," said Wood, now walking around Harry and staring at him. "Light, speedy. We'll have to get him a decent broom. Professor, a Nimbus 2000 or a clean sweep 7, I'd say. I'll speak to Professor Dumbledore and see if we can bend the first-year rule. Heaven knows we need a better team than last year. Flattened in the last match by Slytherin. I couldn't look Severus Snape in the face for weeks." Professor McGonagall peered sternly over her glasses at Harry. "I want to hear you're training hard, Potter, or I may change my mind about punishing you." Then she suddenly smiled. "Your father would have been proud," she said. "He was an excellent Quidditch player himself." So that's where we're going to end the chapter for now. We'll finish up the chapter next video. But right now, I would like to do a couple discussion questions on what we've read so far. So, Chapter 9, The Midnight Duel. What did Neville get from his grandmother in the mail? He received what was called a remembrall. So it was a little ball that had some stuff in it, and if you squeezed it and you had forgotten something, it would turn red. What was kind of funny about it? Right when Neville picked it up, it started turning red. So he'd already forgotten something. Who do the Gryffindors have their first flying lesson with? The Slytherins, which means Draco Malfoy and Crabbe and Goyle. Ugh. So they are going to learn how to fly on broomsticks, which Harry is so excited about, but got a little not so excited once he heard he had to do it, also with the Slytherins. Who was the professor who taught them how to fly broomsticks? Madame Hooch was the professor who did that. All right, how do flying lessons go? There's a lot that happens, isn't there? Well, For Harry, it goes pretty well. Neville, not so much. What happens to Neville during the flying lesson? Sorry, I'm getting the book open. His broom takes off, and then he falls off of it. Ugh. And breaks his wrist. So Madam Hooch has to take Neville to the hospital wing to get fixed up. Luckily, they have magic, so it'll be mended right away. But what happens after Madam Hooch leaves? Draco Malfoy takes Neville's Remembrall and hops on his broom, doesn't he? There's that picture. Harry says, "Hey, give that back. That's not yours." But Neville will not, will he? He's a bully. He's not a nice guy. So Harry jumped on his broom, even though Madam Hooch told them all to keep their feet on the ground, and flies after him. Draco throws the Remembrall, and Harry dives and catches it right before the ground. But who catches Harry after being on the broom? Professor McGonagall. Oh boy. Oh boy. But Harry thinks he's going to get expelled, right? Which means kicked out of school. What happens instead? Who does Professor McGonagall introduce Harry to? Oliver Wood, who we learn is the captain of the Quidditch team for Gryffindor House. And we don't learn much about it, but they say, "We found you a new seeker." Should be interesting to find out in the rest of this chapter and later. So, we will see what comes next in the Midnight Duel, Chapter 9 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by JK Rowling in our next video. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody!